Hello, I am William Jamar Wright,
And I'm Hattie.
and this is our podcast, HattieJo. What are we doing? And what are we doing?
That's a good question.
What is today's
Today's topic. So recently I went on my friend Rachel's bachelorette party, which was so much fun. Congratulations, Rachel. We're really excited to celebrate you and Daniel.
Next month, right?
Yeah, here in just a few weeks, actually.
Party.
I know. But one of the other attendees, also a friend of mine, Becca Ward, we were having a discussion about feminism and stuff like that, which was really a great discussion. But she brought up the idea of, when did you first feel like a woman as opposed to a girl? And the group discussed it, and it was very interesting to hear different people's takes and everything, and I thought that would make a great podcast discussion for us, because I'm sure that it will be different between us.
Yeah.
Or I'm not sure, but I would imagine it would be. And so I'm curious to hear when you first felt like a man as opposed to a boy, and how is that the same or different than feeling like an adult, right?
Oh, that's actually like the question that was on my mind, is like, how is being an adult different from being like a man? And you're like,
Or a woman.
Yeah, or a woman. Like, yeah, how does adulthood change from like that status?
Mm-hmm.
How does adulthood change that status? And I don't know. For me, well, I guess like, so like you started off. You kind of like, you were at this group celebrating. So when did you first feel like you were a woman?
So that's a really good question. And I think for me, the main.
Or is there criteria that you think you have to feel to be a woman?
So that was something we talked about as a group, and there's the whole biological time, like when you're hit puberty and then you're a biological woman, right? You could mother a child.
Yes.
But that's often really early.
Yes.
In the early teens or late teens for different people, and so we didn't really think that constituted being a woman. Even though 400, 500 years ago it might have.
Mm-hmm.
And
that's a very strict and like designated
biological,
point.
There's a very clear yes or no, but again, there's no analogous thing for men.
Sure.
So, I mean, technically there's puberty, but it's
it doesn't
different.
Work,
yeah. So what I recall saying in the discussion was, I've spent a lot of my life being a babysitter or a caregiver or a coach to younger gymnasts, and so there was definitely a long period of time in my life where I identified as a kid still, but was responsible for other kids, mm-hmm. right? As a babysitter, as a coach. And as I grew up, there were still some of those times. Throughout college, throughout graduate school, I also babysat and also coached gymnastics. And I distinctly recall in the early phase of grad school coaching, and my boss, who's the head coach at the gym, Mitch, he's probably, I think he's about 10 years older than I am. And so I always viewed him as an adult, mm-hmm. right? But I didn't really feel like I felt like I was an adult, but not like a woman. Like, yeah. I would still call myself, oh, I'm a girl, or I'm going out with my girls, and all this stuff. And I identified with the gymnasts on a different way than I do now, which was, like, I was never their friend, like, I'm their coach, but there's a difference between I'm their adult coach versus I'm kind of in this transitional stage coach.
Yeah. It's kind of like three phases, like they're peer, like there's like,
girl, and there's woman, and then there's in between, which is neither girl nor woman, but we don't really have a term for it in our culture. Yeah. And so I definitely have realized in the past year or two that I now do not identify in that same way. Like, I very much am like, oh, I'm the adult, I'm the woman here. Like, Mitch and I are now on the same level. Like, and I guess, I think it's just as important that from the kids' eyes, Mitch and I are the same level as it is from my eyes. Mm-hmm. And, like, maybe that's kind of what contributed to me seeing it that way. It was because I could tell they saw it that way. Right, I'm no longer the, oh, just kind of out of college, in college, like, cool older sister type role. I'm like a full adult with a dog and a house, and you know, we had nephews and nieces staying for various amounts of time, and
Yeah.
you know, and just responsible in a whole nother dimension, I guess. Responsible for things other than myself. And that was something that we talked about in the conversation on the bachelorette party, because we were all sitting in the hot tub, and you could tell that people were aware that there was a group of women in the hot tub. But as we discussed, most times we would refer to ourselves as a group of girls, and so would other people, right? Like if we had seen another bachelorette group that wasn't us, like in the hot tub, we would have been like, oh, did you see those girls in the hot tub? They look like they're having fun. Like, we wouldn't have said, do you see those women in the hot tub? Even though we're all late 20s, early 30s.
Yes.
And however, if you went to a daycare center and you saw, or like a child play center, and you saw a bunch of women with a bunch of toddlers, rarely would you say, did you see those girls with their little toddlers? Like, you would never say that. You'd say, oh, look at those women with their toddlers, right? And so
I think most people would be like, did you see those mothers with their like
they
kids?
might say mothers, but they definitely wouldn't say girls.
Yes.
Right? Whereas even, I feel like my sister-in-law, Sarah, it's very common, and my mom too, like, oh, we're going on a girls' weekend, even though none of us are girls anymore.
Yeah.
Right? Or like, oh, I'm going to see my girls, or
But I feel like
we're a group
guys
of girls
are like,
going out.
it's going to be a boys' night out, or I'm going to hang out with the boys. Like,
You think that's similar?
it definitely is not as frequent. Like,
Yeah.
it definitely is not as frequent. But I can think of, like, times where, like, grown adults, like, males, are a bit like, yeah, I'm gonna hang out with the boys tonight. Like, what are you doing? Oh, like, me and the boys are going to grab
Well,
dinner.
I guess there's also a difference, right? If I'm out with my friends, it's like, ooh, there's that hot guy. That's very different than saying there's that hot boy. Whereas a guy could say, ooh, look at that hot girl. Would you say, like, look at that hot woman? Like, no one's... I perceive
But
that
guy
nobody says
and
that.
man, like,
They're both synonyms for adult.
No, I wouldn't say, like...
You think
I
guy
would
is more
say-
that transitional stage?
Yeah, I would say guy is just, like, very... Guy does not signify any age.
Gotcha. Kind of like gal, but nobody really uses
Yeah.
gal. But
Imagine, like, the Midwest.
Here with my gal, so yeah. Yeah, so I just find it interesting that our culture doesn't really have a term for that kind of middle transitional. And it's a lot, you know, they still refer to, oh, the Olympic athletes, like, what a great group of girls. It's like, I think college does a pretty good job saying women's XYZ sport, even though on the Olympic team, most of them are 18 years old or older, so they are actually women, right?
For Olympic sports?
For the women's
Oh,
gymnastics
okay.
team. I mean, the minimum age is 16 years old, but the past couple cycles, more have been 18 or older than have been younger than 18.
But so is 18, like, in your mind?
Well, so that was
like-
another discussion we had. Like, as 18, we felt as a group constituted you're an adult, but you could still be maybe that in that transitional zone between girl and woman, but you're 18, 19, 20, even older before you identify as I'm a woman now, versus, right? So we kind of came to the conclusion that there is a difference between being a general adult versus being a full man or a full woman.
And do you agree with that, like, sentiment?
In some ways yes, and in some ways no. So yes, in terms of, I feel it's part of our culture, and it's easy to say, oh, they're 18, you know, they're in the legal system, they're tried as an adult, or
Yes.
you know, you can be responsible for yourself. I don't need my parent to sign off if I want to get a tattoo or a piercing or whatever. But you know, then it's kind of weird, but I can't buy a drink till I'm 21, I can't rent a car till I'm 25, you know, like,
Yeah,
why do
all
we have
these
these amorphous
random-
ages? But at least there's a consistent time point where generally as a culture we agree this person can make decisions for their own self autonomously,
Yeah.
without needing permission of a parent.
Yeah.
And so I think that kind of signifies adulthood when you get to make those choices. But again, kind of going back to the discussion we had at dinner tonight, college is that maturation phase where you are making a lot of choices for yourself, But you still, or at least the average person still has a lot of help from their parents. Still often relies on their parents or defers to their parents' final decision. So that kind of goes against the 18-year-old as an adult. You know, so it just, that, the concept of 18 and everybody in the culture understanding like that's when you can make your own decisions, that's how I agree with that being an adult. However, when I was 18, I felt like an adult, but I didn't feel like a woman. And so that's the case in where I disagreed. You know, so I wish there was, like we've touched on, a term for that kind of intermediate phase.
When did you feel like a woman?
I don't know. I feel like it's been in the past year or two.
Really?
Like, pretty recently.
So I was dating a girl or somebody until a year ago?
You were at least dating an adult. There's no question about that one.
So I was dating an adult, but not quite a woman.
From my perspective.
Okay. No, and that's what we're operating here on.
Yeah. So yeah, it's been kind of weird. So what about you? Would you say you felt like a man since you were 18, or maybe earlier you felt like a man, or?
So it's interesting. Like, so in sociology, there's a term called adultification.
Ooh, see, we got the sociologist.
So when you're like, actually learned this in one of my classes my senior year from Dr. Linda Burton, who's now the head of the sociology department at Duke.
Putting that education good use.
Yeah, so she actually taught me this in class, but she's like, it's adultification, and it's where like kids, typically teenagers, are given like adult like responsibilities.
Like driving a car.
Yeah, or even like driving a car, or like preparing like the meals for the family,
doing
or
your own laundry.
Yeah, like there's just like responsibilities that are typically deemed for adults, that because of the like household structure, teenagers tend to like take on those responsibilities. And so like it was funny in the class, I felt like she was like, during this lesson I felt like I experienced a lot of adultification in growing up. And so like I felt very independent, especially as I got to kind of like high school, and into like by the middle of like my sophomore year going to my like junior year, there like I relied on my parents for stuff, but there was a lot of like me figuring out like things like, how am I going to get to practice?
Yes,
like,
I very much felt the same way. Like often, like I was kind of, I felt that I was very independent growing up too, and my parents did a lot of shuffling off the responsibilities so that, you know, by the time I get to college, I know how to do my laundry. I know how to make decisions. Like, I never needed to call them to be like, I don't know what to do. It was more like, I might need some money for this. Or, how are you doing? But like, in high school, it was kind of the same way. I was just in charge of my own life, and it was like, Mom, this is my plan. Is that okay with you? Yes, sure, honey. Dad, this is my plan. Is that okay with you? No, I need the car then. We need to figure out a different schedule. Like, but it wasn't a, how do I do this? Or I need help accomplishing this. It was like, I've got it figured out, and I just need you to okay it.
Yeah. So I get, like, for me, because, like...
Is that what you're describing? Or
no, like, well, it's kind of that, like, but, like, I never, or at least in adultification, like... First of all, in adultification, there's no like, permission is not really given. It's just like you kind of, there's this responsibility, something needs to be taken care of, and because kind of like you're the oldest person.
Right, like I would have to go pick up Hunter from school, or I would have to
stop at the grocery store. Yeah, but I feel like that was something that like your parents told you needed to do though, right?
Yes, so you're saying adultification is something that you do unprompted?
Well, not necessarily, like...
Because I feel like the examples that you gave, laundry, driving, all those things.
Well, I didn't give them.
Well, I said them, so I'm trying to understand. This is my first time hearing the term, and you kind of were like, yeah. So could you define it a little bit differently?
Well, it's like, basically, it's like you have adult responsibilities that are like typically a teenager wouldn't So, like, for instance,
So I would agree with taking care of Hunter, a, an 8-year-old, 7-year-old kid. I don't feel like that's traditionally what a teenager is responsible for.
but I would say, like, you were a teenager in high school, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And, like, having your teenage high school, like, student, like, that's able to drive to pick up their, like, elementary school, like, student sibling from, like, school, I wouldn't say that that is.
I mean, it's not as normal. I feel like lots of kids that have the car drive around their younger siblings.
Yes.
So, and again, whether that's because my parents told me so, you saying that it's not adultification if my parents told me to do these things?
So so if your parents told you to go and pick up groceries,
Mm-hmm.
right? They gave you the money to go pick up
Mm-hmm.
the groceries, and like it was understood this is what you were supposed to do.
Mm-hmm.
So an example of adultification, from my understanding, is all right. We are at the house, like we have got to eat.
There's
like,
no
nobody,
food,
like nobody's
so I'll go get groceries on my own initiative.
Yeah, nobody has told me that like I need to go and get food. Like my brothers, like we're all hungry, so like
Mm-hmm.
I have to find a way to like get food on the table.
Gotcha. So in that case, I would retract everything I just said, and I feel like
Yeah, and I don't think there's any need to like retract anything.
well, but just for clarification, I feel like my parents did a lot of maybe more guided adultification,
Yes.
right? So it was in small doses. They kind of set
gave
it
you
up,
responsibilities.
but it wasn't something that I intrinsically like. If they didn't do and I didn't do it, wouldn't happen.
Yes.
It was going to happen regardless. They were just giving me the opportunity to practice doing it.
Yes.
Which I think is very different from what you just described,
Yes.
which is where a teenager has to step into that role of now planning, noticing needs of others and themselves. How am I going to get this right? So
Yes.
I do think that's very different. That's an important distinction that is very different versus, hey, go grab some groceries. Here's my credit card.
Yes.
We need this, this, and this. Versus,
It's
it's 8 p.m. I'm hungry.
either
My younger
yeah.
brother is also hungry. We open up the
Yeah, you just see a need and you like
just
fulfill
do it.
that responsibility.
So you felt like that was more
Yeah,
descriptive of your growth?
Yeah, I feel like that was a part of like just my childhood, and that like there was some forms of like adultification where like there was responsibilities that like nobody ever necessarily told me like this is what you need to do. It was just like, oh, like I saw this and like
it makes sense to me
yeah,
that
it makes sense that
someone
this
needs to do it, and
yeah.
I'll do it.
So like,
Could you give an example of that?
I mean, it just, I would say like,
I'm just curious.
yeah, I would just say, like I'm drawing a blank right now.
That's okay. Anyway, say what the point you were going to
So
say.
like the point is that like there was like a very young age, or not a young age, but like high school, middle school and high school, where I felt like there were certain like responsibilities that like I had for like me or like my younger brothers and sisters, where it definitely felt like maybe like nobody ever told me that like I had to do it, but like I felt like that was part of my responsibility.
Gotcha.
And so like I felt like for me adulthood and like that independence and getting things done and figuring out like how it was going to get done, and in little ways like pushing like the boundaries a little bit, of course what any teenager does, like that independence, like that started for me like in middle school towards like high school.
Interesting. Okay.
And so I would say definitely like me choosing my college, my mom was just like, I'm here, like you do whatever like you think is best. And like I kind of like I talked to all the coaches. Like my mom, she trusted me to make the decision, so like I made the like decision on which college I went. Like there were like I
Good
didn't
choice. Good choice.
I didn't like
Duke.
yeah. And then so like I felt like by the time, especially like for my 18th birthday, I came into some money through an inheritance. So like I was able to like buy a car. Like I was able to buy a car. And, like I had some financial like a little bit of money. So like I was able to do some things, and I felt like that definitely like kind of took my adulthood and like
to the next level.
Yeah, I wouldn't say definitely like because I was still in high school and I was just my senior year, so I definitely didn't feel like I was a man, but I was definitely like trending that way, and like I would say I was I was definitely very independent. Like I wasn't asking anybody like when should I be home. Like I was always typically like home by like
making your own choice by when you said
but like
but at a reasonable time.
Yeah, I was letting people know, hey, like I'm gonna be staying here tonight, but like I wasn't. It wasn't. There wasn't a lot of asking for permission.
I see.
And definitely like for me, I felt like I could go and come as I please, just because my grandmother, she trusted me to like be safe and make good choices. And like I could always like stay at my other grandma's house, who I had a key to. So like I was just trusted, and like I didn't really like. I didn't
raise
really
alarms
need to
on a regular basis.
I didn't need to ask for permission.
So question, this is kind of off topic, but do you expect your children, male or female, when they're 16 through 18 but still living at home, do you expect them to be like, hey dad, I'm going to be at so-and-so's house, and for you to be chill with it, or do you expect them to be like, can I stay at so-and-so's house?
Oh, it definitely is going to be a permission. Like,
so not like what you had?
No. It's definitely going to be a can I stay?
Okay.
But I felt like once I got to college, I didn't consider myself a man, but I was definitely an adult.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
we
had to like I had to there were like forms and stuff for like insurance, because I was still technically on my mom's insurance, even though Duke paid for everything. Like I was, and when I say pay for everything, like if I got
surgeries,
hurt, so Duke wasn't signing me any cash under the table, but but the point is that like once I got to college, like I definitely wasn't calling home and asking like my mom for permission or anything.
Oh
like,
yeah.
I was definitely an adult.
Yes.
By the time I got to college,
I
would say that like honestly, like after my 18th birthday, for sure, like I was an adult. But even trending towards my 18th birthday, like my senior year in high school, I was pretty much an adult.
But were you a man?
I was not a man. And like it's funny that you talked about like this transitional phase. It's really, I don't know when I became a man, or like.
Have I been dating a man this whole time?
Yes, you've definitely been dating a man this whole time. There ain't no question about that one. But it's funny thinking about to like when I first graduated from college and I worked at Presbyterian College. Like I definitely had responsibilities, and like I was kind of in this phase, like intermediate transitional phase, where I had people that were responsible for me, or not I was responsible for, and like their production and how well like, and I was kind of their, I oversaw a position group on a football team, and like they like how they played in games, how they like practiced. Like I took that responsibility on and like made sure that they like held each other accountable, and that like I held them accountable. And it's funny, like although like looking back, I wouldn't say that I thought of myself as a man. I was definitely like, I was a man by anybody's definition of the word.
What do you mean by that?
Well, I feel like by any definition of the word man, like,
you were fulfilling the criteria.
I was fulfilling the criteria.
But yet you still didn't feel like a man.
Yeah. And it's funny thinking back to like high school or college.
So that's just something interesting, because I felt the same way. By anyone's criteria, I felt like I was a woman, but I didn't really feel like I actually am a woman until recently being the past year or two. And so we both had that experience of objectively anyone else we recognize would say that we're men and women, but we don't feel like it. That's just interesting to me. Anyway,
well, it's funny. Yeah. So this quick story. So one night it was junior in college, and we had been hanging out at Tyler's and Patrick at 26B, the greatest place on earth. And the night had ended, and like Patrick, I think it was Garrett. Garrett volunteered to drive me and this young lady that I was seeing at the time and Patrick home. So Garrett was gonna drive us home. It was Patrick.
Home to 26B or home back to your actual home away from 26B?
Home to my actual home away from 26B. Okay. So I had had a couple of beers and was feeling pretty good. And on the car ride, we get to the house, we get to my place, and I'm like, hey, to the girl that I'm talking to, I'm like, hey, are you gonna get out? And she's like, no. And apparently I had quite a few. And then I said to her, forget you then. I'm a grown ass man. I can take care of my goddamn self.
That's where that famous phrase came from, ladies and gentlemen.
Yes.
He's a grown ass man. He can take care of his goddamn self.
So it's funny that I use those exact words. I'm a grown ass man. It literally
and the proof of being a grown ass man was you can take care of your goddamn self.
And still to this day, my friends, Patrick does not let me live that down.
No, it's great. It's great. Keep it up, Patrick.
So
keep doing the good work. Yeah.
So it's funny that as I said, after I graduated from college, I definitely by everybody's criteria, I would fit the criteria for what a man is. But even I guess subconsciously, even though I wouldn't have called myself a man, I consider myself a man, if that makes any sense.
It does make sense.
I wouldn't call it, but I consider myself a man. And the way that I talk to other people and saw myself, I'm a grown ass man. That thought process was still there for me. So I would say honestly, so I was at Presbyterian College for 2 years. And I was 23, 24 when I came back to Duke to become a GA. So,
that sounds right.
And so I came back as a GA. And I had went and talked to the bank and tried to figure all this graduate school stuff out and working here and getting an apartment. And I would say from then on, I definitely consider myself a man.
Interesting.
And
because you were taking care of your GD self.
Yeah, but there was a distinction. There'd been I fit all the criteria
before then,
but that it was kind of that moment of me moving from South Carolina and figuring out all the details on how I'm going to get up here and different relationships that I was involved with at the time. That was very much grown people stuff. And me, I think for me, that signified you're not in this in between phase anymore.
Gotcha.
You're an adult. Things that you do have real consequences. I still did some dumb stuff after that point, but
we've all been there.
Yeah, that moment of making the decision to leave Presbyterian College, a place that I was kind of comfortable with, and coming up here to Duke as a GA, and doing something that was for the betterment of my career, and that kind of, for me, that signifies me recognizing that you know what, I'm a man. So I guess it was around when I was 24 years old.
He's I can put a precise date.
Yeah, cool. And it wasn't one day I woke up and was it's just looking back on
no,
it. Yeah,
it's good to be a
I'm
man.
a man today. Just pop some bottles. No, but that was definitely for me, around the age 24.
Interesting.
When I consciously saw myself as a man.
And so the criteria for you in your mind, even though we've kind of discussed already, was making autonomous decisions for your own self and figuring out your living situation and that sort of thing. Is that what I'm hearing?
Well, like for me, like I think some of the criteria is like being financially like independent, making like decisions not only for yourself, but like those decisions oftentimes have like consequences for other people.
Mm-hmm.
So like me graduating from Duke and deciding to go to Presbyterian College, like that didn't really affect anybody else. Like it was just me accepting a job. But like me deciding to like leave PC and come to Duke, like that was affecting my roommate. Like he was gonna have to find like another living arrangement. That was affecting like my place of employment. Like they were gonna have to find somebody to come in and take my like position.
Well,
on
and
the
not
staff.
only your position on the staff was already taken care of, like being responsible for other people. It
Yes.
wasn't like, oh, I just sit here and write news stories, or oh, I organize event. Like your a fundamental role of your position was taking responsibility for others.
Yes.
So I think that kind of gave you another little edge, as opposed to if you had had a different type of role, you may not have felt as much responsibility.
I still feel like I may not have had as much responsibility in terms of having people under me,
Mm-hmm.
but I still think like that transition really kind of like it was the transition, not necessarily what I was transitioning from.
Gotcha.
Right.
Okay.
If I'd have been working at BMW, my mind would have signified.
Gotcha. Cool. It's interesting you say that, because I feel like within the past year or two is when we started having the nieces and nibblings like more consistently, and that kind of coincides with the time where I really felt like a woman as opposed to that intermediate kind of place. And I mean, other than Amelia, I haven't really had direct responsibility over anything else, and a dog is different than another human being.
Yes.
And you know, it's just interesting that you mentioned, because I had other life scenarios that had implications for other people.
Mm-hmm.
You know, switching labs, switching from my one living situation to living by myself, living with Lauren, like stopping living with Lauren, like all sorts of things, but none of those really signified to me I am now a woman, as much as being responsible for little humans on a consistent basis. Because even at the gymnastics gym, I work with children all the time, and I'm responsible for their safety at the moment. But at the end of the day, their parent comes to pick them up, right? I don't need to get them food or take them to the doctor or...
Well, I wonder if that, like... I'm sure there's some, like, just, like, cultural effects of, like, how, like, my, like, transition and, like, financial independence, like, kind of coincides with me becoming, like, defining myself as a man, and like how you're like
still a student, you know, like, and
or just like you're like having my nieces and nephews around, like having them around, kind of like, and being a caregiver for them.
Oh, you're saying like societal roles, like gender roles,
like how that like played a part in you defining yourself as a woman.
Right. Very interesting. That's a good point. So yeah, it's. We wonder, when did you feel like an adult versus a man or a woman? Yeah. So.
Well, thank you guys, Rachel. Having great
Rachel
talks
and Becca.
yeah.
Oh, and I would like to point out that Rachel's sister-in-law, she went to an all-female college, a women's college, and so she was very different from us. So she what I mean is that when she was in college, they made a point of referring to each other as women. And so her perception of, I felt like a woman, was when she went to college, and it trained her to accept her womanhood and be proud of her womanhood. And it was very different than kind of where I was coming from, which is, oh, we're all still girls, I'm in this amorphous phase, right? And so it was really interesting hearing her perspective. And I thought it was really nice. I was like, there's a lot of value in this. I can see,
they're
Okay, sorry about that. We had a little camera malfunction, but thankfully we were right at the end of the podcast, so that's what we've been doing.
Deuces. See you next month.